Hey everybody, it's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. My name is Brandon Adams, and let me just tell you, it is good to be back after a week away on vacation. Thanks for your patience for tolerating a week's worth of pre-recorded shows, a little bit different kind of content than we normally provide. I'm excited about giving you the regular show, the real deal, again this week, and really every day throughout the rest of the season. We're gearing up and getting ready to go for a fun one. We'll begin today with a look at kind of where this things stand for Georgia right now with its 2021 recruiting class, where it needs to maybe improve, and kind of how it gets there. We'll do that. John Stinchcomb also is a part of today's program there as well, and some very interesting things on the national front being said about Georgia, the rest of the SEC right now. We will cover that. Football back on the field again very soon. We are here to talk about it with you. Good to have you with us. Let's get going. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So while I was away on vacation last week, I would say that about the biggest thing to happen from a news standpoint may have been the fact that five-star, at one point in time we called him a safety, now we sort of call him something different, James Williams, chose Miami instead of Georgia. This is a player that I really, really like. This was a player like many of you I probably assume would be at Georgia. When he didn't come, it was a little bit of an eye-opener for me. However, it's also kind of interesting. Being on vacation, my reaction to this news was just way different than it would have been had I been sitting in the studio, had we been doing the show live each and every day. I would have had a very different reaction. I would have been worried. I'd been concerned. I would have been, what's wrong with Georgia recruiting type of stuff, the same way that we have in the past when maybe Georgia hasn't gotten a player that we wanted them to get or a player that we assumed that they would get. Being on vacation, being away from the microphone, being around my family more, I was able to take a lot more philosophical approach to this. I was able to kind of see things from a little bit different vantage point, and I found myself not really being worried about the James Williams situation at all, because ultimately, whether Georgia, is done with Williams, has a chance to get back involved with him or not, I still think Georgia's going to have an elite 2021 recruiting class. I'm not sure what it's going to rank, number one overall. That would seem hard to pull off right now. Top three, maybe that ship has sailed too, but still a very impressive class. Seems a lot more likely than not. And ultimately, it's kind of the backstory behind the James Williams thing that I think is kind of interesting because, once again, to be philosophical for a couple of seconds here, on vacation, I was thinking about this. That really, when it comes to winning with recruits, there's like four ways to do it. You can kind of offer a recruit a family feel. Hey, come to this program, be a part of our family. You can offer an easy path towards playing time. This is how bad we need you. Come here. You can start right away, play an awful lot. For some recruits, they are sold a business decision. Look at the way in the reasons in which Dallas Turner chose Alabama as a for instance on this. They've won national championships. They're putting guys at the top of the NFL draft each and every year. It's a business decision. It's not touchy-feely. It's simply about the results that will be produced by making that decision. And in some cases, programs offer you a chance to be a hometown hero, which is pretty clearly what Miami offered to James Williams. Now, if you think about, well, what does Georgia do? How does Georgia recruit its players? I think it's probably pretty safe to say that Georgia mostly offers the family feel. Hey, in the past, it's been Sam Pittman. It's still Dale McGee. It's Glenn Schumann. We'll have more on that later on the show. There are assistant coaches that Georgia players just seem to really like playing for. Kirby Smart, I think, is a head coach that players really like playing for. Georgia really, I think, more than anything else, sells a family feel. It clearly can't sell early playing time right now. Maybe that's part of the problem. Georgia, for the most part, sells a family feel. And when you're not able to do visits, when you're coronavirus lockdown, a lot of you haven't seen your family in a long time. So you kind of understand this, that for Georgia, putting together that family feel in recruiting is just a little bit more difficult to do right now. Once visits open up again, whether it's James Williams or somebody else, I still think Georgia is mostly going to be fine with its 2021 recruiting class. However, this also kind of got me thinking about something else, though. That in a time in which you can't recruit the way that you're used to recruiting, come take visits here, get to know our coaches in a face-to-face manner really well, get to know your other teammates in a face-to-face manner really well. In a time in which Georgia can't do that, it seems somewhat smart that it might ought to spend some time then working on beefing up one of the other ways I just mentioned that you can successfully recruit players. I think that Georgia, in the aftermath of missing out on James Williams and some of the other recruits that Georgia has missed out on, or some of the other recruits that maybe you're concerned that Georgia might miss out on. I think this provides a real opportunity for Georgia to set itself up to maybe do less of that in the future. I think that Georgia needs to work on making itself a better destination for recruits from a business decision standpoint. As I mentioned before, Dallas Turner, if you read the four-star linebacker, the pass rusher, at the pages of DawgNation.com a couple of months ago, why was Alabama's leader over Georgia? He cited the national championships. You can cite the the success in putting guys in the NFL draft. And ultimately, I guess my takeaway, once again, being away from work last week, hearing the James Williams news, I guess my takeaway on this a little bit different than it otherwise would have been. Ultimately, right now, Georgia's biggest issue is not who it signs to the class of 2021. Georgia's, I think, biggest issue is making sure it gets the most out of the five-star players it has already signed. Because if you do that, then recruiting for 2021 and in future years will take care of itself. And if you don't do that, if you don't produce big results with the players that you currently have, then frankly, you're not going to keep recruiting at an elite level anyway. So with that in mind, let me kind of give you a couple of numbers here. I crunched some numbers on this. You want to start winning with the James Williamses of the world? You want to keep winning with, five-star linebackers like Smile Mondin, who's still out there, the kind of player that Georgia's won with in the past? It's time to produce big results with the players that already are on the Georgia roster that sort of have that recruiting profile. And that's something, admittedly, that thus far in the Kirby Smart era maybe hasn't been done quite as well as it could have been. Let me give you, if you're on video, I'll show you this as a graphic. And for those of you who are listening radio podcasts, I'll try to make this as easy to understand as possible. So what I looked at was the last four draft cycles, because those are the four NFL drafts that Kirby Smart has been a part of as Georgia's head coach. Over the course of that time, Georgia has produced 6 first-round picks, 11 picks taken in the first 3 rounds, and 21 draft picks overall. However, other programs have fared much better. I looked at the programs that have won national championships during the college football playoff era, which dates back to 2014. Listen to this. I told you 6 first-round picks for Georgia. How about 15 for Alabama? How about 15 taken in the first 3 rounds? How about 41 taken overall? Clemson, more first-round picks than Georgia as well. They've had 7. They've had 12 guys taken in the first 3 rounds. They've had 22 guys taken overall. LSU, 9 taken in the first round, 22 taken in the first 3 rounds, 32 total draft picks overall. Ohio State, 10 first-round picks, 22 guys taken in the first 3 rounds, and 33 total draft picks. So when you look at the programs that have won national championships in the college football playoff era, when you compare what Georgia has done under Kirby Smart over the course of those last 4 cycles, it seems pretty clear that Georgia needs to step up its game in terms of producing very high draft picks, guys taken in the first round, guys taken in the first 3 rounds. And this is not just me saying this for what it's worth. Georgia coach Kirby Smart has said this as well, but for all the recruiting success that Georgia's enjoyed, including going back to 2018 when Georgia was, for the first time in the Smart era, first time in Georgia's history, the number 1 recruiting class, Kirby Smart said that may sound nice and good, but it's actually the results on the field that matter to him more than anything else. Important words from Smart then, worth hearing again now. Here's Kirby.
Well, I think it's great. I think it's great for the fan base, but I'd trade that number 1 ranking for the last number 1 rank in the college football poll. So that's what's important, is what you do on the field, and that's what we'll be measured by as coaches, what we're able to do with this class, what they're able to do in development. That's the key ingredient, is what can you do with these guys nutritionally, strength and conditioning, academically, and even mentally. Mental conditioning is a big part for us. So I'm a lot more concerned with that than how many stars they got by their name.
Here's one of the really cool things I think about football is that the individual goals that players have are actually fairly well aligned with team success there as well. LSU a year ago had 10 players selected in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. That was good for those players individually, but collectively it also worked out to the tune of a national championship for LSU. That's just one of the cool things about football is individual goals, team goals seem to be fairly well aligned with each other. And so when Kirby Smart says, hey, those number 1, those recruits that helped us have a number 1 recruiting class in 2018, we've got to work to develop them. We've got to work to make them the best they can be so we can be number 1 when it really counts at the end of the season. And one of the byproducts that shows that you're on your way towards doing that is how much success you have in the NFL draft. Now, one of the reasons why I bring all this up is as guys like James Williams and other 5-star recruits look in to see kind of what's going on at Georgia at a time in which there is no promise of early playing time because of how deep the roster is. The way that you continue to sell yourself is a great place for recruits to be. is by moving those elite recruits on the front end of a program through the program so they come out on the other side as an elite draft pick. With that in mind, as we head towards this upcoming season, I think it's safe to say that Georgia's got some work to do in that regard. I picked up my copy of the Phil Steele College Football Preview yesterday, and Phil Steele's got his list of the top draft-eligible players. Now, this is one guy's opinion. There's a lot of time for this to change, but it's at least a data point worth considering. According to Phil Steele, Georgia's got the number 5 overall quarterback. That's Newman. The number 43 quarterback as well, and JT Daniels. Georgia has the number 6 overall running back of draft-eligible players in Zamir White. No wide receivers among the top 75, according to Phil Steele. Trey McKitty is the number 18 tight end. John Fitzpatrick is number 24 on that list. Trey Hill is the number 5 center. Ben Cleveland is the number 13 guard. No tackles among the top 75. The top-rated defensive lineman at Georgia is Malik Herring. He's the number 38 defensive end. I should also mention that Jordan Davis is the number 10 tackle. Devontae Wyatt coming in there at number 23. A lot of talented guys in the secondary and amongst the linebackers, but ultimately not a lot of guys right now, at least according to a guy like Phil Steele, currently projected as being first-round picks or in some cases even second-round picks. Now, there's a lot of time for that to change. The season, I expect, is going to take place, and a lot of the guys that are draft eligible for Georgia have a chance to climb those rankings, end up being drafted very high. But ultimately, that's the next step for Georgia from a recruiting standpoint. The guys like James Williams, the guys like the other elite recruits that are out there, they are looking in on Georgia to say, for the people that did look like me as high school recruits from a couple of years ago or last cycle, what are you doing with those guys? Are you taking 5 stars and turning them into first-rounders? Georgia, admittedly, at least compared to the Alabamas and the LSUs and the Ohio States, possibly even Clemson, maybe has a little bit of work doing there. The good news is there's time for that work to be done. And when Georgia does produce big results on the field, when the individual players who are wearing Georgia uniforms themselves produce big results, then the recruiting success that Georgia's enjoyed for the last few cycles is almost certainly bound to continue to follow. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it's good to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, all the platforms again, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're, of course, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Good to be back with our friends in the Classic City again after not being with them last week while I was on vacation. Podcast form, pretty much wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Great to have you with us as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia right now. And speaking of Pella Window and Door of Georgia, I want to tell you about a great offer from our friends there at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. New offer right now for you. Of course, you know they equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. That matters. Increases the curb appeal of your home, which could increase the resale value. Keeps that energy on the inside in a time in which air conditionings are working overdrive. You want to keep that inside your house. Better windows and doors gives you a chance to do that. Also, between now and August 20th, you can get 10% off your qualifying project or 0% APR for 36 months. Great saving opportunity right now from our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They offer the best top-of-the-line warranty, unparalleled expertise, a couple different ways for you to get in touch, whether you want that video conferencing initial consultation or you want to meet face-to-face. Pella Window and Door of Georgia can take care of you in both regards there. How about PellaBranch.com? That's the website, PellaBranch.com. Or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We're going to get John Stinchcomb in a minute. I'm going to talk to John a little bit about that need for Georgia to take that next step on the field to make sure that recruiting remains strong for UGA. We'll do that. There's also an offensive lineman in particular that I want to ask John about on the show today. Let me do one or two more things on James Williams before we get there, because admittedly there were a couple of other thoughts that I had about this recruitment that I want to make sure I mention. Let me show you a couple of sentences that Williams used when he declared his message that he was going to be committing to Miami. And there were a couple of quick thoughts that I had about this that I wanted to make sure I share. And one of the things that, and we'll show this on the screen, let me read this to you. Williams says, "I will not be leaving the Sunshine State of Florida and shutting down my recruitment. Will be signing to the University of Miami, and I will always and forever rep my city until the day that I die." And there are really two quick thoughts that I had about what Williams says there. And one of those things I feel like I'm really lucky about is, I'm not a reporter by trade. I don't have to protect my sources, things like that. I'm able to just sort of share my opinion and tell you what I think. If you're a recruiting reporter and you're spending a lot of times around James Williams, and Williams says that he's going to shut down his recruitment, I think you have no choice sometimes but to take those words at face value. You have to believe him when he says that. Me, I'm a little more free to kind of give my opinion. My opinion is he says he's shutting down his recruitment. Let's wait and see on that. We've seen recruits say this before. Sometimes that's not exactly the way that things work out. I would say that there's a chance that Williams, although he says that he's shutting down his recruitment, maybe he doesn't. However, there's something else, though, that Williams said that I'll admit I'm a little jealous of. He says, listen, I'm staying in the Sunshine State. I'm repping my city until the day that I die. And I mentioned off the top of the show that of the 4 ways I think you can win with recruits, one of those is selling the idea of being the hometown hero. And Georgia, for whatever reason, just hasn't done much of that. But for whatever reason, and maybe I'm just sort of hokey and sentimental, but that kind of stuff really works on. You know, when Dylan Fairchild, we were lucky enough to broadcast his commitment announcement a couple of weeks ago, when he talked about the specialness of being a guy growing up in Georgia playing for Georgia. Man, I want Georgia to get the best players he can get. But when a guy like that says, I love playing for my home state, it just feels really good. And I'm not really quite sure where you leave all of this, because ultimately I want Georgia to get the best players it can possibly get. But I am a little bit jealous at how well some programs seem to be selling the idea of stay at home, be a part of the home state, be a part of your hometown. That has not, for whatever reason, been a huge part of the Georgia repertoire a lot in recent years, but maybe given the weirdness of the 2021 cycle, leaning a little bit more than that, maybe that makes some sense. It's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I'm happy to be back in the saddle again. We've got more recruiting talk later on in the program, but for now, on everything around UGA, let's talk to our buddy John Stinchcomb as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update gets going with John Stinchcomb here. John was good enough to be a part of our season preview stuff last week while I was on vacation. That was a really fun thing to be able to do, but it's also fun to be able to talk to John in kind of our customary spot here as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. So, John, thanks for spending some time with us last week, and thanks for being with us again today, and hope you're doing well.
I'm great. I'm actually in North Carolina, outside of Boone, overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. So life is good, my friend.
So my guess is you may be 15 degrees cooler up there than most of our audience is experiencing today. Is that a fair guess?
We've been laughing, my wife and I. We got kids up here, and we spend all day outside, and we're not drenched with sweat and looking for an IV bag to replace fluid. So there's a significant difference in temperature as well as humidity up here. It's nice to be outside in July and not need to get stuck with a needle.
Yeah, a lot of folks are jealous with you about that. Let me do a couple of things with you. Before we get into, there's an offensive lineman in particular I want to ask you about today, but before that, I was talking before you joined us about how I think the real next step for Georgia is, especially when it relates to recruiting and how well Georgia keeps up its recent streak of elite recruiting, impressive wins that's put together in a recruiting trail. John, I think it's imperative that Georgia does something with the elite recruits that it has. And admittedly, in comparison to the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the LSUs, the Ohio States, the programs that have won national championships in the college football playoff era, Georgia has fewer first-round picks, fewer top 3 round picks, fewer draft picks overall. And, when you look at what I would say measurably a very talented roster for Georgia this season, seeing a lot of those guys move their way up and finding more guys into the first round, something that Georgia produced with 2 offensive linemen a year ago, finding more guys in the first 3 rounds. Georgia had a second-round running back last season in DeAndre Swift. I think for Georgia to maintain its status as an elite recruiting program, I think for Georgia to get over the hump and win the national championship, you've got to see these individual players have impressive seasons that puts them on the front end of the NFL draft radar. Do you agree with that?
I think development of player has definitely been something that hasn't been a strength, candidly, for the University of Georgia. I think the recruiting has always been at a high level. It seems now it's at an elite level with Coach Smart and his staff. Their ability to bring in national talent, not just regional talent, has to be one of the most impressive things that Georgia fans were hoping for and now have exceeded expectations. So I've been impressed with the trajectory, not only of the recruitment of high-level athletes, but the development thereof. That's been a lacking piece of the puzzle. There was years where it just felt like, we've got some talent that's coming in that never really raised its position and ability. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think we're seeing guys from year one to year 3 or year 4 get better, and you say, man, he's good, but now he's playing at a much higher level, and that usually translates into a higher draft status once the April rolls around. So I think that's an area of improvement that's it's trending in the right direction, but it's still something that can get even better. I mean, you look at all the 4s and 5-star guys, the ones that at least stick around
Yeah.
and don't jump ship to other programs. You'd love to see more 1st, 2nd, 3rd round guys be produced in the NFL.
Well, I would suggest that one of the ways in which Georgia is showing that development matters to the program now under Kirby Smart is, a lot of folks will say when it comes to the 5-star safety James Williams, or I'll keep calling him a safety, even though maybe that's a little bit different position profile now. When he chose Miami last week, some people, John, will say, well, if James Coley, who had been a great recruiter in South Florida, if he were still in the coaching staff, you maybe win a recruiting battle for a guy like Williams. And I'll come back and say, in response to that, yeah, but James Coley also wasn't really getting it done with what's supposed to be his main job as offensive coordinator. He may have been doing a great job recruiting, players in South Florida, but in terms of developing the offensive players, I think last year was a little bit of a lost year for Georgia there in that regard. So as an example of a way that maybe Georgia's valuing player development now, maybe more so than simple recruiting prowess, is the fact that he was willing to sacrifice some of its inroads in South Florida recruiting to have what I believe is a better X's and O's offensive coordinator, which I think was what Todd Monken's going to prove to be.
I think that proves for better teams. You can bring in high-level talent, which is important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we want the 4 and 5-star guys, so recruiting is huge. That can't be undervalued. But I think you look at the teams that find success on a national level, the national championship teams, your conference championship teams, they're able to take great players and make them even better. And Coley, in my opinion, this is just how I see things. Great recruiter, but like you said, wasn't getting the job done when to me it really matters, which is between August and January. So yes, it's important to get the right guys on campus, but if you're not developing them and moving the needle and making them better players, then that doesn't check the box of you executing at your job. So I'd much rather see, and I think other teams have proven, that if you can take a group of guys with a high level of ability and make them better, that translates more than just bringing in raw talent from the jump. Now, if you can combine those two things, now we're talking about the creation of dynasties, which we've seen done not too far from our front door, just to the west of us. Mm-hmm. They bring in high level and they make it better. So we've seen how it's done, and Kirby is intimately aware of what it looks like to bring in really talented guys and continue to push them to a higher level. And I think that's what he wants to replicate, if not improve on, there in Athens.
Let me stay on the same topic, but change the subject just slightly. We're seeing a lot of weird stuff in sports right now. Major League Baseball, for instance, is going to play a 60-game regular season. That's started. The NBA is going to start soon. They're playing games inside a bubble in Orlando. It doesn't feel like the NBA without 18,000 people in the arena. They're all kind of living it's almost like a summer camp type thing they're going through. And a lot of sports fans are left to wonder, well, if the season's so different, if it's so weird, does it actually count? Now, the Major League Baseball folks, the NBA folks can figure that out for themselves when it comes to their sport. But for college football, based on the way that I think this sport is going to look this fall, John, I do believe this season counts. Even if it's weird and even if it's hard to get ready for it, I think it counts. And so therefore, the fact that Georgia had no spring practice, or the fact that Georgia's had, limited time to get ready with a new offensive coordinator with a lot of new players and, in some cases, putting guys in expanded role, I think the season still counts. And in terms of the excuses, I think that the right attitude for Georgia is kind of a no excuses mindset of, no matter how weird this season is, it still counts on your resume. It still counts on, the overall trajectory of the program. This still matters in terms of where things are heading with UGA under Kirby Smart. For me, the season still counts, and no excuses, no matter how weird the circumstances are, is the appropriate mindset to have. Where would you come down on a conversation like that?
Well, I think we all can agree this is an asterisk season. You're going to mark this as a little bit different, and it is, and rightfully so. But if you're playing ball, then it counts. I don't care what it is. If you're out there and we all agree to strap up and get out there and play, then you better believe it counts. And what I like is I think there's a prime opportunity for Georgia this season. I know there's a lot of folks that land across the board as to what this season might look like for Georgia, but I think they've got a lot of really neat pieces in place to make a run at things. And if at the end of the year you end up with a championship, you better believe that's something that Georgia fans are going to be proud of, no matter whether there's an asterisk at the front or not. You win a national championship, and that's something to be bragging on.
All right, John, I want to talk to you about Ben Cleveland here in a moment on our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. But before we get to that, I've got some really good news. I know you brought this up a couple of weeks ago. It is now finally ready to go, the brand new Marlowe's Tavern app. If you go to the App Store, you can download the Marlowe's app. Special offers for the folks who have the app. You can also check in every time you go to a Marlowe's. I'll give you a chance to earn some reward points, and that can also lead to some really cool stuff there as well. You can buy gift cards. You can check the menu, everything else. But really, it's a great way to get rewarded for something you already love doing, stopping by and visiting the folks there at the tavern in your neighborhood at Marlowe's Tavern. The Marlowe's app is going to be huge here. All kinds of great savings, special offers, great way to get involved in the Marlowe's Tavern right there in your neighborhood. John, I know that you and I have talked about this a pretty good bit. Now it's here. The Marlowe's Tavern app is ready to roll for folks. They get a chance to really enjoy that. And how much fun is that going to be?
Well, I love it. When we first were eating lunch at Marlowe's and discussing the app, man, I'm a fan of the apps that are actually helpful, where you get rewards and you're able to check in and you can order, pick up stuff before you even arrive. And this app definitely checks those boxes to where it's going to be helpful for a lot of folks, and including you and me, to say the least.
For sure. Well, speaking of being helpful, I think one of the guys that still has a chance to be very helpful for the Georgia offensive line is Ben Cleveland, the, I am assuming, starter at right guard for Georgia here this year. Connor Riley wrote a nice piece about him at DawgNation.com last week. Bruce Feldman's also recently mentioned Cleveland in one of his pieces for The Athletic, calling him one of the freaks of college football, one of those amazing, rare athletes. And when I think about Cleveland along the offensive line, John, I do think of him as that way. And I guess my point to you is this, is that when a guy is so outlandishly, is this even a real human being? The way that Cleveland is so big and yet seemingly in really good shape for someone who's that big, I'm never going to sell my stock on that guy, and I'm never going to give up on the hope that a guy like that has a chance to have a really special season just because he possesses physically what a lot of players just simply cannot match. I think Cleveland's already had a good career at Georgia, but for me, I hold out the possibility that it could even be better here coming up in 2020. Where are you on Ben Cleveland and the physical gifts that he clearly has that writers are noticing? How does that help him get the job done potentially for UGA?
Well, you set it up perfect with our initial discussion about player development, because his physical tools are fairly unmatched with the average player in college football. Really, some of the above-average players don't pass the eye test like Ben does. I mean, he comes in and you notice, you see some of the videos of what he can do in the off season. Now it's a challenge to him to prove that it's not just I'm not just a workout warrior, that he can use those abilities and gifts that he's been given and has cultivated and translate them on the football field. It's amazing that as physically gifted as an individual as he is, that he hasn't been, but there is an opportunity for him to be a dominant player. And I think that's what I'm excited about for him is this opportunity to take his game to the next level. He's been good. He's been solid. But there's an opportunity there with his skill level to be dominant. And I think that's what Georgia needs. They need guys to move from that above average tier to just dominant. And he's one of those that fits the bill. Is having the ability, but needs to prove it once they put those helmets back on, that he can match his ability with what he's able to do on a football field.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. John, let me squeeze in one more thing before we let you go. I was on vacation last week, and I saw this story. I don't know if you saw it or not. Richard LeCount was involved with a young big fan of his, young girl that's battled autism, had open heart surgery, and LeCount just became a real advocate for her, a real cheerleader for her. She was a big fan of his, had been cheering for him for a long time. And John, I know that you're a stakeholder in this program, right? You're more than just a former player. You're someone that really cares about the university. You care about the players beyond what they provide on the field, what they're able to do off the field there as well. I'm sure when you hear a story like that, and there have been a lot of these, it's not just LeCount, there have been a lot of these, of guys who get involved in their community, guys who, in this case, doing for one fan what I'm sure they'd love to do for every single one of the Georgia fans that are out there. That's going to make you feel good as someone who also wore this uniform, still cares about the players who wear this uniform. It's going to be a nice feeling for you and all the guys who are alumni of this program.
It couldn't make me more proud to bleed red and black than to see a highly talented player recognize that there's special opportunities for all of us, and we can give back and share and use our platforms in really positive ways and impact the folks around us. So, whether it's buying meals and Wendy's for families and kids, that was one of the stories earlier on, I believe, and seeing what Richard's doing for that little girl. And I mean, that's what makes you proud, is recognizing that these are good men. I mean, these young men are recognizing that there's a special opportunity that football provides, and it doesn't always happen between sideline to sideline. That for whatever reason, our society has given us a special platform to launch from and utilize to impact so many others around us, and to see Georgia's own take advantage of that and give back and share and bring light into some difficult situations that's what it's all about to me. It's more than just football. It's recognizing that there's such a great opportunity to raise our communities up and help those around us. And we all get to enjoy the passion and joy that Richard plays with on the football field, but to complement that with how he approaches life, it should make every Georgia Bulldog fan proud to be a dog.
It sure does, John. You also make us proud there as well. Thanks for being here as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. We appreciate that, especially given the fact that you're enjoying some vacation time right now. So thanks for spending some time with us. Hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Always a pleasure, B.A. Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So John used a very interesting word there a moment ago, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter of something I wanted to address with him. John said, will there be an asterisk next to the national champion for this season? I think that's a very interesting way to talk about what's going to happen in college football this year. The closer we get to all this, the more I continue to feel like there will be football this fall. And for college football, I think it looks more like a normal season than not, with the exception of the fan stuff. The fan stuff, I think, is still really, really weird and hard to imagine how that feels somewhat normal. But in terms of the action on the field, more normal than not. And in comparison to Major League Baseball, if you're only playing a 60-game regular season, listen, I love the Braves, and I've been excited about what they've done the last couple of nights, but even if they win the World Series this year, there's a part of me that would say, maybe that is a little bit of an asterisk, just given the fact that it wasn't 162 games, given the fact that it's just so different. Maybe that is a little bit different kind of season. Now, if the Braves hoist the trophy, maybe I'll feel differently. But right now, that's the way I kind of look at it going in. The NBA, I don't really know. I mean, let me see the games themselves, and I guess I'll decide. But playing in the bubble, doing that kind of stuff, it's certainly different. Is it different enough to feel like the champion has an asterisk? Maybe I won't know until it's over. College football, though, I feel very comfortable in saying there is no asterisk next to the season. Even if Georgia, let's say, were only to play 9 regular season games, That's still 8 SEC games. That's still likely playing Georgia Tech. You still set yourself up what I'm assuming is a relatively normal postseason. The only games you've really canceled are the ones that didn't really matter anyway, the Louisiana Monroes, the East Tennessee States. As a for instance, what Georgia does this year would matter to me, because if Georgia does well, the momentum that it has from doing well carries over to a future year. If it doesn't do well, the same thing is going to happen. We talked about recruiting up the top of the program. The recruits you do get, you'll use in future years. The recruits you miss on will play against you in future years. Therefore, you can't really view this as an asterisk. So, new offensive coordinator, I don't care, win anyway. Maybe you have to play Alabama without a couple tune-up games. I don't care. Go out and win anyway. For me, the theme for Georgia has to be no excuses. No matter how weird the build-up to the season is, you've still got the same obligation to be at your best as you would in any normal year. That's my at least belief on that. Let me move on to SEC through here. Talk about a couple of SEC stories. By the way, speaking of Alabama, they have been on quite a heater as of late when it comes to recruiting. Most recent 5-star defensive lineman Damon Payne over the weekend, he announced his pledge to the Crimson Tide. This is on the heels of Terrence Ferguson and everything else that's gone on. Alabama was very content to start slowly with its 2021 class, but they have stepped on the gas as of late. You have got to give them a ton of credit. Nick Saban, even in the winter of his career, is putting together a very, very impressive class. They have been very, very aggressive as late, so you got to give them a little bit of credit for that. Over the course of my vacation time, it became known that Devod Wilson, the Georgia defensive back, now former Georgia defensive back, is on his way out of the program. I said this on Twitter. I'll say it again. I wish him well. And that's true no matter where he goes. I loved the moment against Notre Dame when he came up with the interception there. Wilson was one of those guys that prior to injury, I think was really set up to do well in his first season at Georgia in 2018. We didn't see a lot of that from that then. It's a crowded defensive backfield now, maybe a tough spot for him to find as much playing time as he would like. So I wish him well. Now, by the way, there was some reports over the weekend. I guess Saturday Down South had this from Wilson's Instagram story. I'll show you the picture of those of you watching on video. Wilson taking a visit to the University of Florida. Believe it or not, even if Wilson went to Florida, I wouldn't be mad at him. I mean, I just don't really have that kind of attitude when it comes to guys leaving the program. I feel a little bit different about Cade Mays for whatever reason. I guess one of these days maybe we could get into why. But for the most part, I don't really care when guys leave the program, even if they go to a rival. I don't think that Wilson's likely to end up at Florida, but he did take a visit to Florida apparently. If that's what he wants to do, then more power to him. I wish him well in doing all of that. Speaking of Florida, by the way, I picked up my copy of the Phil Steele College Football Preview, and there are a few notes in there that I wanted to make mention of on today's show, and I'm sure I'll do a lot of these on the shows in the days to come. One of the things that Phil Steele does is he ranks all the various position groups, offensive, defensive, nationally. As you're not surprised to hear this, Georgia ranks very high amongst the defensive position units. Number one linebacking core, as a for instance, does not rank very high when it comes to the offensive stuff. The only position group on the offensive side of the ball for Georgia at all to make the top 15 was running backs, came in at number 14 nationally, according to Phil Steele. Once again, you can do with that what you will. That's one guy's opinion, but this is a magazine that gets a lot of attention every year. Georgia, the number 14 running back core, according to Phil Steele. A couple of surprising notes from the magazine that I thought was kind of interesting. These are just kind of the early moments of reading this. National rank for the offensive line, Georgia did not make top 15 on that, but you know who surprisingly came in at number 5 on this list was Kentucky. We've said this before. I said this last week during one of my vacation shows, that one of the areas in which Mark Stoops has done really well as Wildcats coach is he's recruited the offensive line very well. Right there next to Southern Ohio going into Cincinnati. That's a place that produces a lot of offensive linemen in a given year, and Kentucky's found a lot of those guys. So number 5 offensive line nationally, at least keep that in mind as you're thinking about SEC East competition for the Dogs this year. Florida came in with the number 4 linebacking core. You think about Florida mostly as a defensive backfield type defense. That's where they've had the most success, it would seem. But apparently Phil Steele is very impressed with Brenton Cox. Because of Cox and some others, he makes the Gators his number 4 linebackers nationally. And then one more point about Texas A&M, a school that I've talked about a little bit over the offseason. According to Phil Steele, on how he tabulates his strength of schedule metric, Texas A&M is 54 spots easier on that list than they were a year ago. So if you're looking for one of the main reasons why I think there could be huge improvement from the Aggies this year, at least in terms of the final record, the fact that the Aggies measurably are playing a much easier schedule is a big reason why on that will make that your SEC through. I want to get back to the topic of recruiting here a bit, and I know Connor Riley wrote about this last week at DawgNation.com, and I think it's really pretty interesting that as Georgia kind of zeroes in on its remaining targets of the class of 2021, there are a couple of linebackers we talk a lot about. Smile Mondon probably most prominently, but Xavier Sorey is in this discussion there as well. And Georgia, it would seem, is involved with a very contested recruitment on both these guys, in particular Mondon, who at one point in time maybe you thought Georgia was the leader for, and now you hear a lot about Auburn, you hear some about Tennessee. You're left to wonder, where does Georgia stand with all of this? Sorey's also a contested recruitment there as well, and Georgia, without able to do visits right now, you're not able to do those kinds of things, is trying to pull out every stop it can to get that job done. And one of the things that Georgia's even using is its social media accounts and its former players to really make that pitch. Pretty easy to read between the lines, but what all of this is, linebackers selling Georgia as a destination for linebackers. Mondon, Sorey, maybe paying close attention to this. Let me give you a little audio here from a recent video posted on the UGA Twitter account of Roquan Smith saying why Georgia was the right spot for him. Here's Roquan.
Playing at Georgia, man, LBU, man, it was an awesome feeling, and just knowing that it meant a lot to myself and my family, just being able to achieve one of my dreams, and that was playing for the greatest university in the country. Just having the brotherhood that I had there, and then being coached by the best linebacker coach in the country, Coach Schulman. I have a great relationship with him and his family. Everything we did at Georgia, I do now in the league. I really enjoyed my time at Athens. There were so many great things, from the social life, being able to connect with many people outside of the football field, the classroom, great school, great business school, and I just feel like it's the best of both worlds at the University of Georgia.
Still think the show would be really good if I had like the hip hop beat underneath me as I talk the entire time. I still feel like that might be a technical bell and whistle one day ad, but good stuff from Roquan Smith there. Not to be outdone, this was released I think yesterday. Natrez Patrick, who's worked his way onto the roster with the Los Angeles Rams, he had some similar messages to share. Here's our buddy Natrez.
Playing at Georgia honestly was everything to me. Inner city kid like myself, first one going to college in his family, man. Game day in Athens, ain't nothing like it. Literally got the best fans in the land. Kickoff, you feel the ground shaking under your feet, loving on you, know what I'm saying? Letting you know, screaming, yelling, going crazy. It make you want to play it. It make you want to put on a show. It make you want to go out and you know what I'm saying, give them what they want.
I talked at the top of the program about the different ways you can win with a recruit. In some cases, the family feel. You hear a little bit of that from Natrez of, man, these Georgia fans, they really cheer for you. They really, make you feel loved. But there's also a lot of business decision in that there as well. Guys like Smile Mondon, guys like Xavier Sorey, other linebacker, Prince Collie, other linebackers that Georgia might be chasing down. They want to see guys that look like them coming through the Georgia program that go on to the NFL. Roquan was a Butkus Award winner, first-round pick. Natrez Patrick worked his way onto the Rams roster after a very impressive preseason a year ago. Those are some of the examples that you point to for why a Mondon or a Sorey or a Collie or anybody else should come to UGA. And as I said before, it's going to be one of the real themes of the 2020 season for Georgia, finding other guys who travel that same path, who don't just make NFL rosters, but go get paid by being drafted near the front end of the draft. First-round guys, first three-round guys. It's going to be a really important part of Georgia's recruiting pitch here. Georgia's got a deep and talented roster. What do you do with those players? How well do you develop those players? That's one of the huge stories for the Dogs this season. By the way, speaking of elite recruits, I thought it was also kind of fun over the course of the last week. We found out more about the jersey numbers for some of the guys who've just kind of gotten here. For the most part, these are all, I guess to be expected. Admittedly, I think that, what is it? You just got defensive linemen wearing 88 and stuff like that. Some of the non-traditional numbers I don't like quite as much. There is one of the non-traditional numbers, though, that I love. I love the idea of Darnell Washington wearing 0. That just seems to me really fun. First of all, if you're a pass-catching target, throwing to a 0 seems like a fairly easy thing to do. I feel like that's a weapon to potentially utilize. But the 0 on a tight end who's already such an athletic specimen, I think it's just kind of a cool look all the way around. So Darnell wearing 0, I'm kind of excited about that. I think that's going to be fun. Here's something else I'm excited about. My first time doing this with you in a while. Gator Hater Updater. About 1,367 days. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Fun to be able to say that again for the first time in a while there as well. We had shows last week, but no live comments, so we'll get back into that here today. Our friends at R.S. Andrews make it all possible. You know, I mentioned air conditioning a little earlier. R.S. Andrews can help make sure that your air conditioning system is working the way that it's supposed to, keeping you cool. Let's face it, that's a challenge right now. It's hot outside. Yeah, you need that air conditioning system to be working. If you're worried about yours about to go out, well, get tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com, and they'll take good care of. Over here on Facebook to begin with, it always takes a minute for the Facebook comments to load, but we'll get cranked up over here on Facebook, and of course, just be really excited about having all of you with us today. Fun time for me to be back in the saddle again. I love taking a vacation. I like being with my family and, kind of doing some of that kind of stuff. But, man, I really like getting back in here and talking football. I love the energy that I feel coming off of vacation to kind of get back in and just start rolling through it all again. We won't take another day off again until, January at the earliest, maybe even until after February National Signing Day. We get going and we roll pretty well here once all this gets going. So we're looking forward to all of that. I'm also looking forward to these Facebook comments eventually loading, and we'll talk to some of you. Let me just pull up my phone until this thing gets going here. It is amazing how this Facebook interface is going to change here a little bit, but I can do this on the phone. That will not be a problem. And hope all of you had a great week while I was not here. Okay, here we go. Jacob O'Neill, good to see you checking in here. Appreciate that. Let's see what else is going on. Randy Hall says, how about a special get-together at Marlowe's for 1,500 days as a Gatorator? Yeah, I'd love to do some of that kind of stuff. I definitely would. That sounds like a great way to celebrate, and getting everybody back together, getting into Marlowe's is something I'd love to be able to do for sure. Kenneth Wiggins on the idea if Amarius Mims doesn't choose UGA. Yeah, that seems to be one that Georgia fans still feel pretty good about. Let's see what else is going on over here. Jermaine Dunbar says, who's next to announce their commit? I guess you got your eye towards Brock Bowers here a little bit. You got some of that going on. Laura Reed says, one of the rare days in which Facebook's slower loading than Fortnite. Yeah, so for whatever reason, the video's not slow loading. It's just getting the comments to show up on my laptop. That's gotten to be a real pain. Zinti Allen says, we missed you. The pre-recorded show was boring. Thank you, Zinti. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Hugh Nash says, great to have you back. Let's see what else is going on. Keith Fold says the no excuses mantra is the key. Yeah, it is key for me. I think that's really important. I think it's really important to treat this season as no matter what the season throws at you. Play Alabama the first game, whatever else. Just go win. Go win. No one wants to hear the reasons why you didn't. They just want to see you go out there and generate those results. And the great news is I think Kirby Smart probably understands that better than anybody does. Matt Rugavina says that Kirby always closes strong, not giving up on the idea of having a top 3 class. And I think that's probably fairly well said, Matt, for sure. Jamie Huff mentioning the idea of a Hall of Fame player recruiting for Georgia. Pretty clearly, that worked for North Carolina. Dre Bly with Tony Grimes, worked with Ed Reed on the James Williams front. Those are clear examples of that. However, I think that the presence of Bly, the presence of Reed, the presence of guys like that is not necessarily going to be an ultimate game changer in recruiting. Admittedly, it did work on this one, though. Joe Brammer says live is better for sure than the pre-recorded. I guess the question becomes, are the pre-recorded shows better than nothing? But nonetheless. Jamie Huff mentions the idea that Hines Ward, Champ Bailey could be Georgia's version of a James of an Ed Reed or a Dre Bly, and certainly, I mean, Hines Ward is in coaching now. I mean, that is true. At one point in time when Ward's name came up as a possible coach at Georgia, he wasn't really involved in the coaching front now, but he's going down that path. He is involved in coaching now, so maybe at some point in time in the future, we'll be talking about guys like that. However, when it comes to the receiver position in particular, I continue to believe that Georgia's in pretty good hands when it comes to Cortez Hankton. Scott Gentry says no excuses is right. Time to finish the drill for a national championship. Enough settling, and I think that's probably about right. I think that's probably about right. Let me go get some YouTube stuff here in a moment. Let me get some YouTube comments here. Hope all of you had a good week. I certainly did. And it's always nice to be welcomed back. Jerry Dogs fan says, will there be a playoff or national championship with seemingly no out-of-conference games? I mean, obviously all of that's still yet to be determined, but understanding the playoff selection, committee's mindset, the entity that runs the playoff as well, they're going to do everything they can to have a college football playoff. Bill Hancock, who's the executive director, who we've had on the show before, Hancock has said that they're going to be ready to do a playoff around whatever the sport looks like. Obviously, there's huge financial benefits. You see this with Major League Baseball as well, where, the owners wanted as little regular season as they could get away with because that's a money loser for them with no fans. However, the playoffs, given the specific TV contracts in place for them, that's a big money winner. The college football playoffs much the same way. There's so much money to be gained, even from a somewhat unusual season, that having a college football playoff, they're going to try everything they can to do that. The one question I wonder is, below the college football playoff, how different the rest of the bowl season could look. I think that's an interesting question because, especially for a lot of those bowls that take place like prior to Christmas or around Christmas, a lot of those bowls house teams that are going to be facing very, very different schedules this fall. I'm wondering how different some of that kind of stuff looks. Mike D, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Mark Abe, thanks the same way. Scott Harris back from his honeymoon. Good to know that. Scott, glad to have you back here. That's great. Jay Shipe says, thoughts on the September 12th exhibition match between Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. I'm a huge fan of both Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. I once traveled to Biloxi to see Roy Jones fight. I was a big first of all, I used to be a big boxing fan back in the day, and was a big Roy Jones fan in particular. I just always loved his style. So I don't take pleasure in saying that if I wanted to see two 50-something-year-old men fight, I would mention masks on Facebook. I mean, this is one of those things where I'm just not that interested in the old guys fighting. However, a lot of those workout videos from Mike Tyson, he's in good shape now. And, Tyson's one of those guys, you have to be, if you're way younger than me, I don't think you have any idea about what the Mike Tyson mystique once was. It just was, baddest man on the planet was absolutely an official title, for a guy like that. So, listen, is there a chance that my morbid curiosity might not gravitate me towards this eventually? I'd rather watch Tyson fight Jones. I guess I heard some rumors that Floyd Mayweather may fight Butterbean. Like, that's something I have no interest in whatsoever. Eric Esch, I believe Butterbean's real name is. Get no interest in that whatsoever. The Tyson Jones thing was something I would have liked maybe several years ago. Scott Harris says Roy Jones Jr. was way too cocky. Sometimes in a boxer, for me, that kind of works. Brad H. says that Hines maximized his talent, my favorite dog ever. Yeah, if there was a way to measure, like, your total football ability, I think that, and I obviously say this with all due respect in comparison to the great Herschel Walker, but when it comes to total football ability, the ability to do the most things on a football field, Hines Ward may have been able to do about as much as anybody could have ever done. He start at tailback, rushed for 100 yards against Alabama, started at quarterback, won games for Georgia, was obviously a great wide receiver, was a terrific blocker. Hines Ward was good at everything. He was like I mean, he was almost like, every high school kind of had one of these guys who was just sort of the best player at every position. It just mattered which position you chose to put him at. Hines Ward was like a college version. It was not a surprise to me that he went on to great success at the NFL level, just given just how good he was in college. Boy, it's fun to be doing these comments again. Stephen Wainwright says, can't wait to see what Todd Monken's going to do with our offense. Well, I'm right there with you on that. Randy Hall says Butterbean is now buttermilk. So I'll tell you my Butterbean story. In addition to being formerly a big boxing fan, a lot of you know I was a huge wrestling fan to the point where I traveled around, saw a good number of WrestleMania. I was in Philadelphia for WrestleMania 15 when Butterbean fought in a legit match against one of the wrestlers. When I tell you that you saw Austin Riley's home run for the Braves last night, Butterbean's knockout punch of, I think it was Bart Gunn. When I tell you that this was coming out of his heels, it looked just like Austin Riley's home run, except as a human being on the receiving end of the blow. I had way different level of respect for Butterbean after that. Pow! For sure. Scott Harris says defensive backs kept their head on a swivel when Ward was on the field. You better believe they did that. Jeff Hensley, this is cool, said he played with Hines Ward at Forest Park. That's really cool. Randy Hall reminded me about the top fan of the month award. Yeah, we got to start doing that, Randy. I apologize for being derelict in that. Matthew McGay says, do you expect the offense to be better than last year? If so, how much better? So let me be semi-sarcastic at first, then I'll be more serious. I expect it to be somewhat better because it'd be hard for it to be worse. I will say that, just realistically speaking for a moment, and I really don't care what Phil Steele thinks. I really don't. But, I mean, this is a magazine a lot of folks pay attention to. So when you look at, his ranking of the individual units, like I said, this is one guy's opinion. I wouldn't put a lot of stock into one guy's opinion. But he's got Georgia with the 16th best quarterback. He's got Georgia with the 14th best running backs. When it comes to wide receivers, he's got Georgia as the 28th best receivers. He's got Georgia as the 17th best offensive line. Now, maybe if we'd gone back and looked at LSU a year ago, and actually I'm sure I've got a 2019 Phil Steele lying around, maybe we can look to see where LSU was ranked a year ago in terms of just how much improvement at those various position groups is even possible. I mean, that's actually probably a topic worth exploring. But when I see some of these magazines and the other magazines that I spent a lot of time reading these magazines this week, like the Athlons and the Lindys and the, Street and Smiths, they're similarly kind of, overall pretty high on Georgia, clearly a top 5-ish type team, but on the offense, just not necessarily, buying into major improvement. I mean, I guess there's a extent to which I'm sort of forced to wonder if maybe that's not worth considering that they may be right about it. Because when folks last year, preseason-wise, would have doubted Georgia's wide receivers, as it turned out, they were true about that. So, how much improvement are we going to see from the Georgia offense? I still expect there to be pretty significant improvement. But I will admit that when you look at some of these magazines and you don't see Georgia ranked very high, really anywhere, offensively in any of these, to the extent that you care about these other opinions at all, it at least caused me to pause for a moment. I think it's a really good question. Gerald Harmon says Facebook crashed. I don't think it crashed. I'm still looking at stuff. Randy Hall says, I'll take a Bowers, Mims, Mondon, wide receiver, defensive back run, and recruiting. Yeah, that'd be a pretty good run. And obviously all the social media stuff Georgia's doing about linebackers right now gives you an idea of just how much they're trying to prioritize Mondon, it would seem. Diallo Alameyu, and I apologize, Diallo, if I mispronounce your name, said last few years we cry about recruiting woes, and each year number one or top three, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Totally agree with you on that. I do completely agree that that there's still plenty of time for Georgia to put together a class, and I think that once the door is unlocked, start taking visits again, that's when you'll see Georgia doing, I think, better on that. I think that Georgia just sells the idea of, hey, come be a part of a comfortable university community. That's what Athens is. Have a comfortable relationship with your position coach. That's what Georgia seems to have a lot of. Georgia clearly can't sell early playing time to a lot of players, and I think that Kirby Smart's really sensitive to being negative recruited against that. That's one of the reasons why he said what he said on the Paul Feinbaum show a month or so ago about the programs that sell that kind of stuff. He's sensitive to that. And I think that, as Georgia worked its way up towards having the kind of success, both in the draft and on the field, that programs like Alabama has had, it becomes even easier to have these elite classes. But you are right that Georgia fans have lamented before where the class stood around this time of year and things all kind of worked out before it's all done. Van West says he thinks that George Pickens is one of the top 10 receivers in the country, that Phil Steele is a moron. So there you go on that. Obviously, expectations continue to be high for George Pickens. Good to see Van West checking in on that. Matthew McGahee says we need D-Rob to step up this year. And I think that's kind of a point that I'm also kind of building towards a little bit, Matthew. I agree with Van. There's no doubt that George Pickens is a top-flight player in my mind, setting up for an even better year two than he had as a freshman last year. But of those guys who've been in the program, those draft-eligible players like a Demetrius Robertson, you really need a big contribution from them as well. And while I will, put my faith in Pickens up against anyone's, I'm a little less certain of what Georgia's going to get from the guys who are a little older than Pickens who are still in the program. Let's see what else is going on. Jamie Scott says, does the national media affect our recruiting in a bad or a good way? I would say that national media talk about college football is a little bit like you watching commercials and things like that. If you're watching TV, obviously commercials work. Otherwise, people wouldn't spend as much money on them as they do. But when you hear the same one over and over again, when you watch a lot of sports, you do end up hearing the same commercials on TV a lot. Maybe you have a tendency to, kind of tune that out over the time or, something like that. I'd say that some of the messages can kind of work the same way in college football there as well. Like, for instance, if would-be Alabama recruits were hearing over and over again that Nick Saban may retire, Nick Saban may retire, Nick Saban may retire, eventually maybe they have some questions about that. But ultimately, what they're hearing from sources that are more far removed from the program than they are may not carry as much weight with them as you might think. Stephen Venanzi, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. It actually works out pretty well to have the Facebook on the phone and the YouTube on the laptop. I'm able to see both comment sections a lot quicker. That's kind of nice, actually. Cody Taylor says, I don't think that I'll ever get over James Williams not coming to Athens. I feel a similar way about Williams. For a lot of the commenters who've said Georgia will still get an elite class, I agree with that. I think that's probably true. However, I also would like to have had James Williams. That's just one of those players that just seems really interesting to me. Big, tall frame. Seems like you could put a lot of muscle on that frame and, build yourself a really good football player. Not to say that he's a can't-miss prospect. I don't know that anyone is, but Williams was a player I would have really liked for Georgia to have. And as I said during the regular show, even though he says he's shut down his recruitment, I'm not quite so sure by that. And I can say that with all due respect. Shelton Tucker says, the idea of playing college football with no fans. I will say that the Major League Baseball without fans has been a little weirder than I assumed that it would be. I have noticed it more than I thought that I would. I don't really know why. I really don't. Because, a lot of these, early season Major League games wouldn't have a lot of fans in them anyway. So I don't really know what the difference has been for me, but I have noticed it. It has led me to believe that if there's a college football season, I think more likely than not, at least the beginning of the year, this will be true, where there's very few fans or in some cases no fans, it is going to be a little weird. Now, the one thing I have to keep reminding myself is that ultimately I want a season so bad that I'm willing to tolerate anything. I'm willing to tolerate, the weirdness of the season. I'm willing to tolerate Georgia maybe not being as good as I want them to be. Ultimately, just having a season, just given how crummy this year has been for so many people, both from a health standpoint, from a financial standpoint, just having a season's important this year. So if it's a weird year with no fans, then so be it. But I have noticed the absence of fans in Major League Baseball more than I thought that I would. And we are getting ready to go here in about a minute or two. Matt Talley on the subject of Todd Monken. I agree with Matt's overall point that I think that Monken's got enough football credentials that he seems a lot more likely to bring about change to Georgia's offense than maybe someone like James Cole would have the ability to do. I think that Monken's got some gravitas. He's been a head coach. He was a, I would say successful offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. He was a play caller in the NFL going back to the Tampa Bay Bucks. Warren Sharp, who's kind of a football mind, was on Colin Cowherd's Saturday podcast, and he was saying that even though he wasn't the play caller in Cleveland a year ago, that he had a good bit of influence over the Browns offense there as well. So Monken's a respected name in football, the kind of guy that I would imagine had a lot of choices of where he could have worked. He didn't come to Georgia because this was the only place he could get a job. And so therefore, I agree with Matt's point on Facebook that if you're looking for the kind of guy that has the gravitas to potentially bring about change to the Georgia offense, convince Kirby Smart to do things a little bit differently, someone like Monken seems to be a pretty good candidate on that. Let's see what else before we go. Dairy products and the subject of Miami. And, listen, Miami has really stepped up in the recruiting, for 2021. They've had huge number of decommitments the last few years. Maybe under Manny Diaz, things are just going to be different there. They're expected to get Taylor, the defensive lineman, coming to Miami instead of Florida. They've had some recruiting wins and expect to get some more. So maybe they're going to be a player again on the recruiting on the recruiting front. Jose Cuebo says, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Jose, it'll be great to sign all the in-state players, but someone would transfer with all the talent. Yeah, to go back to what I said about James Williams a little earlier, his impassioned statement about repping his city, and like I said, I'm kind of corny and sentimental anyway. That's just kind of one of my character flaws, I guess. But I love that kind of stuff. That stuff really works on me. When guys really, really seem proud to play for a school that maybe they grew up cheering for. I just love that. Williams mentioned, Sean Taylor. Mentioned Sean Taylor, the deceased former Miami safety, in his recruitment message. I mean, clearly he's got a lot of, history. He understands the history of the Miami program. And like I said, stuff like that just kind of works on me. I love it when folks do mention that kind of stuff when they come to Georgia. And while I don't necessarily want Georgia to stop recruiting the elite national players, because that's a great way to build yourself towards a national championship, things are just easier sometimes when you got guys who grew up dreaming of playing for UGA. Matthew McGahee says Pickens needs someone on the other side to help him. Yeah, I think it's a really important story for Georgia this year. Robert A. Smith says, is D-Rob an example of a guy who hasn't been developed? I think that's a really, really challenging question on the basis of the fact that he had a better year at Cal in 2016, than he's had thus far at Georgia. It seems fair to say that. He was also playing against easier defenses in Berkeley, very different kind of offense that he was able to sort of get some empty calorie yards. He was able to do some of those kinds of things, but this is a guy that maybe hasn't developed at Georgia as much as I would like to have seen him. Now, second half of last year, he was really targeted a good bit, and just for whatever reason, kind of wasn't coming up with football. So that's an example of a guy who was a former five-star, who had kind of played at a freshman All-American level in a easier league, that you'd love to see have that really big moment at Georgia, big season at Georgia, so you can point to him and say, hey, this is what we do in the SEC. We turn these kinds of guys into big-time NFL draft picks. We'll make them more than just speedsters. We make them full, complete football players. I won't go so far as to say that Robertson hasn't been developed. That seems a little harsh for me. But I am very comfortable in saying that's the exact example of the kind of player that could be developed a little bit more. I think it's a good topic. Seth Huey says, any more information on Blaylock's recovery? All I know about Blaylock is kind of some of the stuff we've talked about before, that it certainly seems like he's been progressing nicely. Been a couple of hints dropped by George over the course of time about that. And so, I feel pretty good about Blaylock being at least on schedule, if not slightly ahead of schedule when it comes to his recovery. I just think that it's still a challenging injury to be ready to contribute right at the very beginning of the season on. But if anybody can kind of fight through that, Blaylock seems like the kind of guy who could. Shannon Ray Daniels makes an interesting comparison. Says Kendall Milton reminds me of Derrick Henry. Oh, that's interesting. Boy, that'd be fun to see. Bobby Bryan, thanks for the kind words. Anthony Vino Sneed says clock is ticking on Tommy Bush and Matt Landers. That's true, but as I mentioned with Landers before, one of the things that does at least give me a little bit of a second thought about him is his teammates love him, man. They love him. And Tommy Bush remains one of the most popular players in our comment section in terms of people mentioning those names. So, I'm one of those guys that gives up slowly when it comes to Bush or who else? Matt Landers or Trey Blount, guys like that. I'm not really ready to give up on any of those guys yet. But it's obviously time to do something for sure. David Johnson, the subject of the cardboard cutouts behind home plate. Yeah, I don't even mind those so bad, but it is a little bit weird. Sheldon Tucker says, why no show on Saturday and Sunday? My wife would strangle me if I told her I was going to start doing DawgNation Daily on Saturday and Sunday as well. I can promise you that. All right, we are going to get ready to go. Good stuff as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here today. Let me also remind you to check in on AJC.com. Get your Atlanta news now for everything going on there. Obviously, one of the sad stories this past week, although the remembrances have been so touching, the passing of John Lewis, legendary congressman and a huge part of the civil rights story here in the city of Atlanta. The tributes to him have been really awe-inspiring, and the AJC's had great coverage of that. You can read that online at AJC.com and get all your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. You can check that out there. Thanks for being with us as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door today. Thanks for being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Back live again. Been fun to be doing that with you once again. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. Your water heater goes out. In many cases, they can replace it for you the very same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. I'll see you back tomorrow. And I'm glad to be able to say this. 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.